Right now, President Biden is on the ground in Ukraine for a surprise visit as we approach 1 year since Russia's invasion. The president was expected to leave the U.S. for Poland tonight and deliver an address in Warsaw tomorrow. The administration originally saying there were no plans for Biden to visit Ukraine. This visit coming after a slew of world leaders, including UK's Boris Johnson, visited there, and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker Nancy Pelosi, visited. Even First Lady Jill Biden visited last May for Mother's Day in Western Ukraine. This is President Biden in Kyiv. We want to go now right to Peter Ducey in Poland if we have him. Hey, Peter, what can you tell us?
Just in the last 1 minute, this visit to Ukraine that is a surprise and that was unannounced became reportable. We're getting some photos for the first time that we can have ingested, but as recently as Friday, we were told there were no plans for the president to visit Ukraine. As recently as about 2.5, 3 hours ago, the White House was publishing a schedule for reporters in Washington, D.C. Hey, be ready to come to the South Lawn. You can watch President Biden tonight at 6:40 or so, leaving on Marine One, just like he does anytime that he's going to go to Air Force One. But that was all part of a very elaborate ruse, essentially, to give the Secret Service and the U.S. military time to prepare this visit. According to a very small traveling press pool that was with the president in Kyiv, he did not announce any kind of new assistance that the Ukrainians have not already received, but he did say they're going to get at least $500 million more dollars in security assistance. And again, this is so new, we have not even had time to read through all of it. But if the big headline is that the president made this daring drop by to a city that the Russians have been attacking or trying to attack for almost an entire year. And some of the early social media reports that we've seen with the president on the ground indicate that he's there standing next to Volodymyr Zelensky as air raid sirens are going off. That is highly unusual. That is very dangerous. But it appears that President Biden has safely made a trip to Ukraine, and we do expect to get much more details once he joins us here in Warsaw, a little bit ahead of schedule. We didn't think we were going to get him until about this time tomorrow. Griff.
Yeah, Peter, you know, this is very significant. Obviously, it appears we will soon have video of him walking along President Zelensky near the presidential palace. We'll see if he visited Zelensky's presidential palace there. And I can tell you, as someone who's been on the ground in Ukraine, they are never secure there. And in the recent increase of attacks in Kyiv, as well as Russia gears up for this new offensive, which many believe, to include our own Jack Keane, has already started, there is certainly a high level of risk that the administration has decided to take in sending President Biden. Any indication as to why he would take that risk with increased concern of attacks on that capital city?
And Griff, we're getting some new information about exactly how they were able to pull this off and how they were able to keep it a surprise. So we thought the president was going to leave in the 6 p.m. hour tonight. As it turns out, yesterday at 2 o'clock in the morning, the traveling press pool was asked to go to Joint Base Andrews and hand over to the president's staff their devices, which is common for a trip like this. We saw something similar when President Trump most recently went to Kabul as a surprise visit over Thanksgiving. So they handed over their devices. They did not see the president board the plane. Usually you get a shot of him walking up the stairs. Sometimes he talks to reporters. They basically just showed up, got on Air Force One. We don't know which aircraft was used as Air Force One at the moment, but anytime the president is on a plane, that becomes Air Force One. And they make this trip into Ukraine, and we've got some quotes now from the president, and we do expect to get him on video saying these things next to Zelensky. But at the moment, the president says, "I thought it was critical that there not be any doubt, none whatsoever, about U.S. support for Ukraine and the war." President Biden said the Ukrainian people have stepped up in a way that few ever have in the past. And the president then said, "For all the disagreement we have in our Congress on some issues, there is significant agreement on support for Ukraine. It's not just about freedom in Ukraine, it's about freedom of democracy at large. That's all very important because as recently as yesterday, the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, was doing the rounds on the Sunday shows saying that he recently met with his Chinese counterpart, and they are very concerned about possible Chinese support for Russia in this effort. And that is something that comes to bear, where China and Russia are essentially teaming up against Ukraine and NATO. That is an entirely different can of worms, and that would really escalate this conflict in a way that it has not over the last year. And we've all seen how brutal the last year has been without China getting involved, at least that we know of. That's a big one. There's also, as the president referenced here, there are, in the new Republican Congress back in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of lawmakers in the majority that want to essentially slow down some of the support that has been going to Ukraine. It's billions upon billions of dollars, and there just is not as much support in the Republican-led Congress as there was maybe in the Democratic Congress. And so President Biden is aware of that. He is addressing that. And you see, these images are extraordinary on the camera that you're seeing on the screen right now, I should say. The President of the United States in an active war zone, standing next to the President who, this time last year, Zelensky was hiding out in a bunker. You expect to see something like this, pictures like this, in the Oval Office or at the White House. You do not expect, for security reasons, to see something like this happening in Ukraine. That is why there was so much secrecy about this. And again, President Biden has been planning and teasing this visit to Poland to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We did not expect him to make such a dramatic drop by Kyiv, but here we are. Griff.
Right, and Peter, my next question is, since there was so much secrecy surrounding this trip, no one had any clue that this part was going to happen. What does that mean for him right now? Do we know that he's there right now? I mean, who knows? Like, when were these pictures taken? Do we know?
So they would have been taken in the last couple hours. We don't know exactly where the president is at the moment. And part of the agreement with these initial details that we are getting, that again, it's so new. We haven't even had time to read through all of it. But the press pool that is with him says that they have agreed not to report on the president's real-time movements. So usually we'll get a note as part of the traveling press. We've boarded Air Force One. Air Force One is leaving. Air Force One has landed. We're not getting anything like that right now, just because of the security concerns that had everybody for the last several weeks saying that there was no plan for President Biden to go to Ukraine. And there was some reporting as recently as yesterday in Politico where they were citing some unnamed White House aides who said that they concluded it was just too dangerous for the president and too dangerous for the Ukrainian side to attempt a stop like this. We were here this time last year, or maybe about 11 months ago, when the president came to Poland, and there was a lot of speculation that he might try to cross the border and maybe not into the center of the country, but just cross the border as a show of support, and he didn't wind up doing it because it was considered too dangerous. A lot of folks thought that this was going to be too dangerous as well. And they figured out, with a lot of very careful security planning and coordination with the Ukrainians and the U.S. military, that it was going to be possible, and they did it.
Images coming in, President Biden walking there with President Zelensky and the First Lady of Ukraine. Here we see the president sitting in the presidential palace meeting with President Zelensky, no doubt, likely talking about those F-16s, the jets, the thing that Ukraine and Zelensky wants more than anything right now. After getting tanks, after asking for a long time, before that, the long-range missiles and the HIMARS. We're getting a statement from the White House at this moment, Peter. A statement from President Joe Biden. It says this. I'm going to read in part as I'm just getting it now on my phone. As the world prepares to mark the one-year anniversary of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, I am in Kyiv today to meet with President Zelensky and reaffirm our unwavering and unflagging commitment to Ukraine's democracy, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. They add, when Putin launched his invasion nearly 1 year ago, he thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. He thought he could outlast us, but he was dead wrong. Today in Kyiv, I am meeting with President Zelensky and his team for an extended discussion on our support for Ukraine. I will announce another delivery of critical equipment, including artillery ammunition, anti-armor systems, and air surveillance radars to help protect the Ukrainian people from aerial bombardments. And I will share that later this week, we will announce additional sanctions against elites and companies that are trying to evade or backfill Russia's war machine. Over the last year, the United States has built a coalition of nations from the Atlantic to the Pacific to help defend Ukraine with unprecedented military, economic, and humanitarian support. In that support, I will endure. He ends it saying, I also look forward to traveling on to Poland to meet President Duda and the leaders of our eastern flank allies, as well as deliver remarks on how the United States will continue to rally the world to support the people of Ukraine and the core values of human rights and dignity in the UN Charter that unite us worldwide. Peter, a very strong statement of unwavering, unflagging support. His words, not mine. This is a significant statement to make coming on the one-year anniversary of the largest ground war in Europe since World War II.
Yes, and again, there are some influential foreign policy writers that we know President Biden pays attention to, like Nick Kristof in the New York Times, who was writing within the last 24 hours that President Biden should give the Ukrainians anything that they want so that they can fight back the expected Russian onslaught over the next couple of months. There is no, we know that the Ukrainians want these F-16 fighter jets. We also know that that would require a lot of training for Ukrainian pilots, and we also know that would give the Ukrainians a capability that they don't have right now, potentially to do things that the U.S. is not comfortable with, including strike inside of Russia. A lot of the weapon systems that the U.S. has been giving over the last year to the Ukrainians are being outfitted in a specific way so that they can fight Russians that are in Ukraine, but they cannot fight Russians in Russia. They cannot do that. And at the moment, it does not appear that this trip is going to yield any F-16 fighter jets. Doesn't mean it's never going to happen, because the Pentagon said for a long time they weren't going to give the Ukrainians the Abrams tanks that they wanted, and we know that that commitment was made a few weeks back, and that the training is underway to teach the Ukrainians how to use those. They sent 31, or they committed 31 Abrams tanks, and it just takes a couple months to get these things going. But this is a big visit, and you think back to over the last 20 years, while the United States was at war in Afghanistan, for example, when a president or a vice president would visit there, including Joe Biden when he was the vice president for Barack Obama, the threat was terror groups for the most part. That is who they were concerned with. The Russian military has such superior capabilities than any terror group that they would have been worried about legitimately over the last 20 years. And that's the threat here. The worry here would be that Russia is lobbing missiles into a city. And they still calculated that they could get President Biden in there. It is an extraordinary accomplishment for White House planners, for the Secret Service, for the U.S. military to make this happen in a safe way. And we don't have real-time movements for the president still, but it does appear that they have figured out how to do this safely.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter Doocy is live in Warsaw, Poland, where things were a little different this morning. You were expecting the president to be in Poland, but things have changed. He is in Ukraine, or at least the last that we heard, he's in Ukraine. As you said, we don't know exactly where he is right now, but we will find out. Peter, obviously hang on the line. We're going to be coming back to you. Now,
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.